The carriage that came up the Harrogate drive at noon was the finest the household had seen in a decade, and every soul on the steps had been told the same thing. The Duke had married, and the Duke's wife was arriving today, and they were to receive her as their mistress. Eudora Vale, Dowager Duchess of Harrowgate, stood at the top of the steps in grey silk with her chin lifted, prepared to be gracious to whatever heiress her son had finally been sensible enough to secure. The footman opened the carriage door. A gloved hand came down to the step, and the woman who descended, in travelling clothes the colour of claret, with her dark hair dressed simply, and her gaze level and unhurried, was Clara Ashworth. Clara, the companion they had thrown out of this house at dawn 14 months before. Clara, accused of theft, marched to the gate before the servants woke, sent into the cold with one trunk and no character. She looked at the dowager for the length of one breath. She did not curtsy. She did not speak. She walked up her own steps, past the woman who had ruined her, and into the house, as though she had never left it. The dowager opened her mouth, and found she had nothing to say to a woman who would not give her the courtesy of a single word. 14 months earlier, that same hall had been a different country. The old Duke had been 3 weeks dead, and the house still moved on tiptoe. Clara Ashworth had come to Harrowgate 2 years before that, as companion to Lady Sophia, the Duke's young sister, a position arranged through a clergyman cousin because Clara's father had died, leaving debts where a dowry should have been. She had no fortune and no rank, and a great deal of spine, and she had learned early to make herself useful and quiet, the way poor gentlewomen learn or starve. She had not expected to be noticed by the new Duke at all. Adrian Vale was a man built like the winters of the north, tall, spare, dark-eyed, with a thin white scar running from his left ear down to the line of his jaw, the souvenir of a jewel he would not discuss with anyone. He had bought himself a colonel's commission at 20 and come home at 28 harder than he had left, and his father had spent the years between teaching him that softness was a thing other men exploited. He spoke little. When he did, people listened and were usually sorry. She noticed him first across the music room the evening after the funeral. He had come in expecting it to be empty and found her there, playing very softly so as not to be heard. A slow, grave piece, the one his father had liked. Most people, caught, would have stopped and stammered and fled. Clara had glanced at him, recognized that he did not wish to speak, and simply kept playing to the end before she rose. "You did not stop," he said. "You did not ask me to, Your Grace." She gathered her music. It was his favourite. I thought the room ought to have it once more before we all pretended he had never sat in it. He looked at her then, the way a man looks at a door he had assumed was a war. It was the first thing about her he noticed against his own will. Not her face, though her face was worth noticing, but that she had not flinched. He had spent a fortnight being flinched at. He found he could not stop watching the unbothered set of her shoulders as she left. After that, he began, without admitting it to himself, to arrange to be where she was. The library, at the hour she fetched Sophia's books. The East Terrace, where she walked in the grey mornings. He told himself he was simply moving through his own house. The household, which misses nothing, began to notice that a new duke was in a great many rooms he had never troubled to enter before. The first crack came over a ledger. He found her in the steward's room one afternoon with the estate accounts open before her. a thing no companion had any business touching. He had come in to be angry. "Those are not yours to read." "No," Clara agreed, not rising, not apologizing. But Lady Sophia asked me why the household sums had grown so strange, and a girl of 17 ought to be told the truth about the house she lives in. So I looked. She turned the ledger toward him and laid one finger on a column. "Someone has been moving money out of the estate and writing it back in as repairs that were never made. The carpentry here was billed 3 times. The roof at the south wing was billed last spring. The south wing has no roof, Your Grace. It has had no roof since the fire your grandfather never repaired." He stared at the page. Then he stared at her. "You see a great deal for a woman paid to read aloud and arrange flowers." "I see a great deal because no one expects me to see anything," she said. "It is the only advantage poverty gives a woman. I have learned not to waste it." For one moment, something in her voice slipped. A flat, weary honesty about her own smallness in the world that she had never meant to show him. And he saw, beneath the composure, exactly how hard she worked to keep it. After that, neither of them could quite pretend they had not seen the other plainly. He did not act on the ledger at once. He should have. The figures pointed, if a man followed them, toward a place he did not want to look, toward his mother's hand. Instead, he carried the knowledge around like a stone in his coat and found reasons to keep being where Clara was. The courtship, if a thing so unspoken could be called that, happened on the east terrace in the grey hour before the house woke, because it was the only hour neither of them had to account for. She walked there for the quiet. He had begun walking there because she did. They never arranged it. They simply both came, morning after morning, and at first they did not speak at all. And then, one morning, he did. "My father walked here," he said, "every day until he could not. I used to think it a waste of an hour a man might have spent doing something. And now? Now I think he was the only honest man in the house, and this was the only place he could be it." He glanced at her sidelong. "You are not afraid of me. Everyone is afraid of me. My valet is afraid of me. I should like to know why you are not." "Because fear is expensive, Your Grace, and I cannot afford it." She kept her eyes on the frost-stiff box hedges. "When you have nothing, you learn quickly which men will hurt you, and which only wish you to think they might. You are the second kind. You frighten people because it is cheaper than trusting them. I know the trick. My father did it with creditors until the day he died." He stopped walking. "You should not be allowed to say such things to a duke." "Then dismiss me." She stopped too, and met him full on. And there was no insolence in it, only a terrible steadiness. "But you will not, because I am the only person in this house who tells you the truth, and a man starving for a thing does not throw away the one who brings it." For a moment, the cold air held perfectly still between them. Then she added, more gently, "Your father was honest here because no one was watching. You may be honest here too. I will not carry it back to the drawing room. I have no one to carry it to." He did not answer. But the next morning he came again, and the morning after, and he began, slowly, the way a frozen river breaks, with a sound like something cracking deep down, to tell her things. The jewel and the scar, and the friend who had earned it. The commission his father bought to make a soldier of a boy who wanted to be a scholar. The first betrothed, years gone, who had wept prettily over his title at the engagement, and never once asked his Christian name. Clara listened, and asked the questions no one had asked him, and gave him back each morning a little more of the man the late Duke had walked this terrace mourning. Neither of them called it anything. Both of them began to measure the day from that hour outward. The old Duke, before he died, had given Clara one thing. In his last clear week, he had called her to his bedside. He had liked her. The only one of the household who read to him without making it a performance, and pressed into her palm a small brass key. Cold and heavy, the bow worked into the shape of a sheaf of wheat. "The desk in the muniment room," he had said. "Mine, not the steward's. When you have need of it, and not before, you will know. Tell no one you hold it." She had thought him wandering. She had kept the key on a ribbon under her bodice all the same, because a dying man's secret is a heavy thing to refuse. She did not yet know it would be the only weapon she would ever own. The danger, when it came, wore satin and arrived at a dinner. The Dowager had decided her son would marry Lady Honoria Crewe, whose dowry was £40,000, and whose father held a marker against the Harrogate estate that could be made to vanish on the wedding day. Eudora needed that marriage, the way a drowning woman needs the bank, for reasons she had told no one. So she filled the long table with the Crews and their friends, and seated Lady Honoria at her son's right hand. And she watched, across the candles, the precise instant her son's eyes went instead to the companion seated far down among the poor relations. It was nothing anyone else would have caught. Clara said something low to Sophia. Sophia laughed. The Duke, hearing that laugh, turned his head and let his guard down for the space of a heartbeat, and his whole hard face changed. The Dowager saw it. She understood it completely. And she understood, with the cold clarity of a woman defending a secret, that the penniless companion was now the single greatest threat to the only plan that could save her. "Miss Ashworth," she said sweetly down the table into a lull, "do play for us. You are so very accomplished for your situation. We are all curious where a girl of no family learned such fine manners." It was meant to draw blood, to remind the room exactly what Clara was. Clara rose. "My father taught me, Your Grace," she said evenly. "He had no money to leave me, so he left me the only things that could not be sold for his debts. I have found them harder to lose than money." And she played, not meekly, but a bright, difficult thing that filled the room and left Lady Honoria's polite tinkling earlier in the evening sounding like a child at a pianoforte. The Duke did not take his eyes from her. The Dowager did not take her eyes from the Duke. Two different reckonings began at that table, and only one of them would be survived. He found Clara afterward in the dark library, where she had gone to be unseen. "You should not provoke her," he said. "You do not know what she is capable of." "I provoke nothing. I answer." She turned from the window. He was closer than she had thought. "Your Grace, why are you here?" "Because I cannot seem to be anywhere else." The honesty of it appalled them both. He lifted his hand and, with one scarred finger, traced, not quite touching, the line of her jaw. The air between his skin and hers gone tight and warm and unbearable. She could hear his breathing. She could hear her own. The whole room had narrowed to the half-inch of cold air between his hand and her face, and every rule she had ever lived by stood in that gap like a locked gate. And for the first time in her life, she wanted to put her shoulder to a gate and break it. She did not step back. She tilted her face by the smallest degree into his hand. "Clara," he said, and her name in his mouth was a thing neither of them could take back. The door opened. A footman with a lamp, the Dowager's footman, sent to find exactly this. They sprang apart. Nothing had happened. Everything had. And the worst of it was the look on the servant's face as he bowed and withdrew. Because they both knew the man would report what he had nearly seen, and that the report would go to the one person who could turn a nearly into a noose. The Dowager moved at dawn. She did it well. Clara woke to candlelight and the housekeeper's frightened face, and a Dowager standing in the doorway of the little attic room. On the washstand lay a sapphire bracelet, Eudora's own, that Clara had never touched. "It was found among your things," the Dowager said, loud enough for the gathering servants to hear, soft enough to seem grieved. "I might call the magistrate. Theft from this house is a hanging matter. But you were my daughter's companion, and so, for her sake, I will be merciful. You will be gone before the household wakes. You will not see my son. You will take no character from me. And you will speak of this house to no one, or the bracelet becomes a charge and not a kindness." She smiled. "Do you understand me, Miss Ashworth?" Clara understood her entirely. She understood that the Duke was being sent to the South Fields that morning on invented business, so that he would not be in the house. She understood that to argue was to hang. She dressed in the cold and packed one trunk while a maid wept. And as she went, she took from the washstand nothing of the Dowager's, but her hand closed under her cloak around the brass key on its ribbon at her throat. When you have need of it, and not before, she did not yet know what it opened. She knew only that it was hers, and that everything else they were taking from her was not. They put her out the gate as the sky greyed. No one opened it for her. She opened it herself and walked through, and did not look back at the house, because she had decided in the night that if she looked back, she would never be able to stop, and a woman with nothing cannot afford to grieve where anyone can see. It took the Duke 9 days to find her. He had come back from the South Fields to a house that told him she had been dismissed for theft, that she had confessed, that she had gone willingly and asked that he not be troubled. He believed none of it for longer than an hour. He knew the ledger. He knew his mother. He knew the exact shape of a lie built to be unanswerable. And he turned the county over until he found her in a posting inn 3 days' ride north, working in the kitchen for her keep, while she waited for a cousin's answer that he could see, in her face, was never going to come. She was scrubbing a table when he walked in, and she went very still. And then she kept scrubbing, because she did not trust what she would do if she stopped. "Clara, you should not have come." Her voice was steady, her hands were not. "If you are seen here, it ruins you, and does nothing for me. Go back, Your Grace." "I will not." He came around the table. There was 9 days of road on him and something in his eyes she had never let herself hope to see. "I went through the desk in the steward's room. I followed the figures you showed me. They lead to my mother, Clara. Years of it, a fortune gambled and speculated and lost, hidden behind repairs to a wing with no roof. She needs the crew marriage because the crew dowry is the only thing left that can cover what she has done before the creditors come. You were not thrown out for theft. You were thrown out because you could read a column of numbers, and because I could not stop looking at you. And she could not have both those things loose in her house." Clara set down the cloth. "Then you know I cannot come back. I am the proof of her crime and the ruin of your marriage in one person. I am worth more to you gone." "You are worth more to me than the estate." He said it plainly, like a man reading a verdict. and she saw what it cost him. A man taught from the cradle that softness was weakness, laying the softest thing he had on the table in a public kitchen. Marry me, by special license, before she can move again. Not to save you, to stop being a coward in my own house. Marry me, Clara. And here she did the thing the master prompt of her own heart demanded. She did not weep, and she did not say yes. Not first. She stepped close to him, close enough to touch the white scar she had wondered about for 2 years. And she said, "Stop apologizing for them, Your Grace. I am not the one you wronged. Your house was, and your father's name was, and you were. So do not ask me as a penance." Her hand came up against his chest. "Tell me what you mean to do about it. Then ask me again," he told her. It was not a clever plan. It was an honest one, which was rarer in that family. And then he asked her again. And this time, she said yes. And this time, in a low-ceilinged kitchen that smelled of bread and tallow, he closed the half-inch the library had denied them. No, not yet. Only his forehead against hers, his breath unsteady, both of them shaking, saving the rest. Both of them somehow knowing, for a door they had not yet earned the right to walk back through. They were married 11 days later, quietly, in a parish church with the innkeeper's wife and a curate for witnesses. Clara Ashworth, who had been put out the gate at dawn with no character, became the Duchess of Harrowgate with a borrowed ring and a brass key still on a ribbon at her throat. The cost arrived almost at once, and it was heavy. The Dowager, learning by express that her son had married the dismissed companion, did not faint or rage. She did something worse. She wrote to everyone. Within a fortnight, the whole county knew the new Duchess was the thief turned out of Harrowgate, a fortune hunter who had snared a grieving man, and that the Duke had thrown over Lady Honoria and £40,000 for a kitchen maid. The crew marker was called in. The other creditors, smelling blood, followed. A man came to the door with papers. The estate that had been drowning in secret was now drowning in public, and the world agreed on whose fault it was. And Clara watched her husband sit at his desk with the demands stacked before him, and she understood that the Dowager had been right about one thing. By choosing her, he had let the house fall. She had cost him everything the marriage was supposed to save. There was an evening when she could not bear it. She stood in the door of his study, where the candle had burned to a stub and the papers had not moved in an hour, and she said, in a voice scraped raw, "She told me I would be your ruin, and I called her a liar. I am a thief of a different kind, Adrian. I have stolen your name's last chance and given you my poverty for it. Do not." He did not look up. "Do not put her words in your mouth. I cannot fight them both at once. Then look at me and tell me I am wrong." She came to the desk. "Tell me the marker is not called. Tell me the men were not at the door this morning. Tell me you would not have £40,000 and a whole house if you had married where your mother told you. And I will believe you, and I will never say it again." He could not tell her any of it, because none of it was a lie, and he was too honest a man, even in his exhaustion, to pretend. He only pressed the heels of his hands against his eyes, and for the first time since the inn, there was a real distance between them. A silence full of all the figures neither of them could pay. "Go to bed, Clara," he said at last. and the gentleness of it was worse than anger, because it was the gentleness of a man too tired to reach across a table. She went to her own room that night and lay awake holding the brass key, hating it for being the only thing she owned and the one thing in the world it could not buy back. And then, in the grey before dawn, the hour she had been thrown out, the hour she had learned to be awake in, Clara remembered. When you have need of it, and not before. The old Duke had not been wandering. He had known what his wife was. He had known for years, and he had been too proud or too tired to fight her in the open. But he had not died without leaving a hand to be played. The desk in the muniment room, his, not the steward's. The room the steward's ledger could not account for, because the steward had never held its key. She did not wake her husband. This was hers to carry. She had decided that at the gate 14 months before, that she would not be a woman things were merely done to. She wrote him one line. I have gone back to Harrowgate. Trust me one more day than is reasonable. And she took the morning coach south, alone, with the brass key warm in her fist. Which is how the finest carriage the household had seen in a decade, for the Duke, finding the note, sent his own after her, and caught her at the last posting stage, came up the Harrogate drive at noon, and how the woman they had cast out at dawn came back through her own front door, and would not give the Dowager a single word. She walked the length of the great hall, while the assembled family and the crews and the gathered county gossips who had come, frankly, to watch a fortune hunter humiliated, fell silent. She did not go to the drawing room. She went to the muniment room, and she fitted the brass key into the old Duke's private desk, and it turned, and the lid came up. Inside lay everything. The old Duke had been a meticulous man, betrayed by a wife with a faster hand. There were the true accounts in his own writing, kept in parallel to the false ones for 6 years. Every sum Eudora had taken, every debt she had hidden, every forged repair, dated and totalled. There were 2 letters from the moneylenders, addressed to the Dowager herself, in her name, proving the debts were hers and not the estate's, which meant, under law, that they could be set against her own jointure and her own settlements, not against Harrogate or against her son. And there was, beneath it all, a deed of provision the old Duke had quietly executed in his last month. A sum settled in trust on Miss Clara Ashworth, who was given this house more honesty than its own blood. More than enough, with the debts correctly assigned, to clear the public demands and let Harrogate breathe. She carried it all back into the great hall. She laid it on the long table where the dinner had been 14 months before, when the Dowager first decided to destroy her. And there, in front of the crews and the county, and the servants who had watched her put out the gate, the Duchess of Harrowgate finally spoke. She did not raise her voice. She had learned long ago that the loudest thing in a room is the truth said quietly. Your Grace, she said to the Dowager, you told me once you were curious where a girl of no family learned her manners. I will tell you. I learned them from your husband, who in his last week trusted me with the key to this desk, because he could not trust his own wife with the truth of his accounts. She turned the true ledger so the room could see it. The debts that came to this door are not the estate's. They are yours. Here are the lender's letters, in your name. Here are the sums, in his hand, 6 years of them. Here is the roof you built 3 times for a wing that burned before I was born. She set the deed atop the rest. And here is the provision he made for the companion you called a thief, because he knew, even then, what you would try to do to anyone who could count. The Dowager had gone the color of her grey silk. He was a sick old man. That hand could be anyone's. It is witnessed by his solicitor and sealed, Clara said. You may dispute it in Chancery, before all these good people, for as many years as you like. I do not think you wish to. And then she said the thing the whole county had come, without knowing it, to hear. The thing every overlooked soul in that hall had waited a lifetime for someone to finally say to the great. You put me out of this house at dawn, your grace, with one trunk and no name, and you did not open the gate for me. I opened it myself. I have done a great many things for myself since. I find I prefer it. She looked, at last, at the silent crowd. The Duke chose his wife. His father chose to trust her. The only person in this room who chose to lie was the one who needed £40,000 to cover what she had stolen. Now you know which of us was the thief. It was the Duke who broke the silence. He had come in at the back of the hall in time to see his wife finish what he had been too slow and too gentle and too dutiful to do for years. He did not orchestrate it. He only witnessed it, and then he crossed the hall to stand beside her, and said to the room, in the voice that made men sorry, My mother will retire to the dower house at Cawood. The settlements will answer her debts. This matter is closed, and the lady at my side is the Duchess of Harrogate, and the next person to suggest otherwise will answer to me directly. The crews were already calling for their carriage. They did not speak of it until the house had emptied and the candles burned low. And then he came to her at the window, where he had once almost touched her and not dared. You went alone, he said. You might have told me what the desk held. I did not know until that last morning, and I needed... She stopped and chose honesty, which she had taught him to value. I have spent my whole life being the thing that is done to, saved or ruined or dismissed, always by someone else's hand. I needed once to be the hand. I think you understand that better than most men alive. I do. He took her face between his scarred fingers, and this time there was no lamp and no footman and no half-inch left to keep. I have been apologizing to you, in one way or another, since a kitchen in the north. I am done. I am only going to be grateful for the rest of my life that I was too much of a coward for too long. Because if I had been brave a month sooner, I would never have learned what you are. And then he closed the distance both of them had carried for 2 years and kissed her. And it was not gentle, and it was not careful, and it had nothing left to prove. The surrender of the last wall in a house that had at last become theirs. A year later, on a bright October morning, Clara stood in the music room with the windows open onto the south wing, where a new roof, a real one, the first repair the house had honestly paid for in a generation, caught the light. The brass key no longer hung hidden at her throat. It sat in plain view in a little dish on the old Duke's desk, in the muniment room she had unlocked for good. And the desk was used now for ordinary things, letters and seed accounts, and Sophia's clumsy first attempts at managing a settlement of her own. The Dowager wrote twice a year from Cawood, stiff little notes that Clara answered with stiff little kindness, because a woman who has won can afford to be merciful, and a woman who lost cannot afford to refuse it. Eudora's debts had eaten her jointure, and she lived now on what her son allowed, which was enough and not a shilling more. The Crews had taken Lady Honoria to Bath and married her, within the year, to a baronet with a sound roof and no scandal attached to his name. And the county, which forgets nothing but forgives anything once a fresher disgrace arrives, had moved on entirely. Adrian came in expecting the room to be empty and found his wife there, playing very softly the slow, grave piece his father had liked, the one she had refused to stop playing the night they met. This time he did not stay in the doorway. He crossed the room and stood behind her with his hands on her shoulders until she finished, because he had learned, finally, that the loudest thing in a house is not its title, or its debts, or its old cruelties, but the quiet of two people who have stopped flinching and simply stayed. "You did not stop," he said. "You did not ask me to." She tipped her head back against him and smiled. "I told you once a room ought to have it before we all pretend he never sat here. I think the house is done pretending." Outside, the new roof held the morning light, and the gate at the bottom of the drive stood open, not because anyone had been sent to open it, but because the Duchess of Harrowgate had given orders, the week she became its mistress, that it was never again to be shut against anyone arriving at dawn.